Okay, everybody, we're going to be talking about group dynamics as a science, as a scientific study. There are a number of different ways in which group dynamics has been looked at by different researchers. There are different theories. There are different levels of analysis, and we'll talk a little bit about that throughout the course. So, basically, if you're talking about science, the history of it, think about Gustave Le Bon, the psychology of crowds as one piece. Wilhelm Wundt wrote about folk psychology. Durkheim, who's a sociologist, talked about a collective consciousness, kind of when a group when you have people in a group, the group forms kind of a consciousness of its own. On the other hand, Alport would have disagreed, and the argument that a group has some kind of a mind is silly, and it's really the individuals within the group that have motivations and whatnot, not the group itself. So Alport certainly says different, but again, these are different perspectives. Finally, an important contribution to the understanding of groups is Kurt Lewin, who came up with a very simple formula about interactionism, which really essentially just means that the B is our behavior, and that the behavior is a function of the person and environmental factors. So in other words, people are interact with the environmental factors to determine how people behave. So it's personality as well as the environment reflect behavior. What does this have to do with groups? Well, groups, the people who you are associating with represent environmental factors that can certainly impact your behavior. Here's a theory of how groups develop that comes from Tuckman. Now, theories in general are very important in terms of studying groups from a scientific point of view. A theory gives you a general starting point to kind of understand the world around you. So you could look at group formation, you could look at group conflict, you could look at team performance, and you do it from a theoretical perspective. In other words, you have a theory that you're using to try to explain, to try to predict how groups behave, how groups act. That's the importance of theory. So Tuckman's theory is one such theory, and it's a theory of how groups develop. And according to his theory, that there's a regular pattern that comes about when groups form, when they develop. It has a very memorable sequence here: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So the idea is that it starts when group formation begins, that people are kind of getting to know each other a little bit, just getting oriented with each other. That's the orientation stage. Then it's a next stage, which is the conflict stage, the storming stage, so to speak, where members of the group are kind of sorting things out and trying to get, sorting out their disagreements and stuff like that, and trying to figure out who's the leader, who isn't, and groups form against each other. That would be the storming stage. The norming stage is where they are kind of getting together now and trying to figure out, who has what role, and how they're going to proceed, and so on. And that would be where the group structure is forming, and that's the norming stage, where norms are being formed. Finally, the next step is the performing stage, where the group is actually doing what it is tasked to do. If it's a team, that they're actually going to be playing the game and trying to win the tournament or whatever. If it's a work group, they're trying to get the particular assignment done. And then, of course, once the work is done, then the group can kind of separate and go their own way. And that's the adjourning stage. So again, his theory is based on the idea that groups, the way groups develop is developed in these sequential stages here. Now, as we get to the chapter, I believe the chapter on structure, we'll talk about different theories that argue that it doesn't necessarily work in this nice sequential sequence, but nevertheless, this is an important theory that kind of helps us understand groups. Now, as far as how researchers might want to study groups, you can start at the individual level. How are individuals behaving and reacting in group circumstances? And that would be like the micro level, the individual level. So that's where a psychologist would certainly be interested here. A scientist would be interested perhaps in the at the group level. Now might be a sociologist, focusing on the social context, the groups that the people are in, rather than the individual, focusing on what's happening at the group level, not really interested in what is going on within each individual member of the group. You could even go farther and realize that groups just represent subsets of different larger groups. In other words, for example, you could have work groups that are part of an organization. You have a hospital, you have the Lady Lake Regional Medical Center. There are different departments with different work groups within that. Well, those groups are still part of the macro level, still part of the organization. The organization is still even part of the community. Our Lady Lake Regional Medical Center is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge is in is the capital of the state of Louisiana. So you're thinking about where the organization fits within that community. Then you're talking at the macro level. But again, we're still talking about groups. We're talking about those interactions among those pieces. And realize, of course, we can take multiple perspectives, not just focus on one. So realize that when you think about studying groups, how it could be a multi-level approach here. I guess when you think about the importance of group dynamics, of studying group dynamics, is realizing how significant groups are. How really we could not function as a society unless we had groups that were able to perform certain kinds of tasks and do them well. Certainly, there are times in which we might feel we feel like we could do something better if we do it ourselves rather than have to rely on other group members. But there are certain tasks that just have to be done by groups, and it's important that we understand how groups work and how groups and their members interact with each other. Groups have an influence on society. Groups can be in conflict with each other. Groups are, again, they're very important for being able to get complex tasks done, often require groups to do it. Unfortunately, of course, if we think about the dark side of groups, realize that kind of people can behave in very unpleasant ways when they are in groups. Sometimes because of peer pressure, people might engage in very risky and dangerous behavior because of kind of the influence of the people around them. Sometimes you can be in a group and be in a way dehumanized. In other words, you essentially lose your humanity. You just kind of go with what the group is doing, what the mob is doing. We have cases of what went on in Rwanda, the massacre in Rwanda, as an example of group behavior gone terribly wrong. Okay. So bottom line is there are many different areas of inquiry that study groups: anthropologists, architects and designers, psychologists, which is what I am, sociologists, and so on. So the study of groups goes to many different disciplines, many disciplinary approaches, and many and group dynamics is actually a great opportunity for interdisciplinary work, where an anthropologist can work with a psychologist, for example, on a particular type of research endeavor. So again, it's an important area to look at. Okay, and again, the chapters in the textbook, if you look at it, can be organized in a number of, in certain kinds of certain categories here, and the modules that we have set up on Moodle mirror these kind of distinctions. So if you look at an introduction to group dynamics, chapters 1 and 2 look at introduction to how groups are studied in a scientific manner. Chapters 3 through 6 look at how groups are formed, how they develop, how they're built. Chapters 7 through 9 look at how groups can be involved in terms of how people can be influenced by a group, how people can take charge, and how people can express power and leadership in group circumstances. Chapters 10 through 12 talks about how groups work, how they perform, how decisions are made, and how teams are formed and what teams can do as opposed to just regular ordinary groups. Finally, next in chapters 13 and 14 talks about conflict in groups, where there can be disagreements, where there can be violence even perhaps, but disputes basically either within groups, which is chapter 13, or between groups. How you could have one group, one faction against another faction, and that would be conflict. Finally, the last 3 chapters, 15 through 17, talk about different contexts where people can study group behavior, study groups. It could be done in terms of therapy situations. It could be done in terms of studying how crowds behave, and there are just different ways of looking at that. So basically, that's how the topics in the course are being laid out, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this course.